Hey screenwriters. Welcome to part 2 on how to quickly and easily create unforgettable characters using my 2 triangles method to character development. In the first part of the video, we talked about the psychology triangle, your character's wound, wants, and needs. Today's video is all about personality, so let's get into it. My method is called the 2 triangles method because it focuses on 2 main areas of your character: their psychology and their personality. In my first video, I discussed the psychology triangle. That triangle determines your character's psychological makeup, what drives them and what moves them forward. But in order for your audience to understand the psychology of your character, it has to manifest itself into something that can be seen or heard on screen. Today's video is all about the personality triangle. And the personality triangle is about how your character's wounds, wants, and needs manifest themselves to the outside world. It will show you how to take your character's internal dynamics and help them become something external that the audience can experience. The personality triangle is made up of 3 components: your character's POV or point of view, the way your character compensates to the outside world, and your character's voice. So let's start with the first part, your character's POV or point of view. Now, if you grew up being bullied or beat up, you may develop a point of view that the world is an unfair place, a place where the strong preys upon the weak. Because your wound impacts how you see the outside world, it acts as a kind of lens that distorts reality. Think of POV as a kind of prescription glasses for your characters. It determines what they as a character focus in on. And for you, a POV helps bring focus to your character. So your character's POV not only helps you understand what they focus in on as a character, but helps you as a writer determine what you have to focus in on for that character. And that's what your character's POV is. It's how their wound has distorted and shaped the way they look at the world. And the first step in terms of developing a great character personality is understanding their POV and understanding how they see the world and how their wound has shaped how they see the world. And now you know why we started initially with the psychology triangle, because your character's wound shapes everything about that character, including their POV. You can't understand a character's POV unless you understand their wound. So let's look at how some wounds have impacted some characters' POVs. In Moby Dick, for example, Captain Ahab's wound is quite literal. He loses his leg to the white whale. That creates a point of view for him that the only way that he can be made whole again is to kill the whale that crippled him. In Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ferris's best friend Cameron Fry is so put down upon by his father, is so beat down upon by his father, that he develops a point of view that he's not worthy of having any fun or any enjoyment. This is why during the adventures of the movie, Cameron is the one that has the greatest amount of difficulty enjoying their day off. In Pulp Fiction, we actually see a character's POV change in Act 1. When Vincent Vega and Jules Winfield survive an assassination attempt, it completely changes Jules' POV on life. He quickly decides to give up his life of crime because he feels that God has spared him. In this case, you can argue that Jules' wound is not a specific thing, but the toll a lifetime of crime has taken on him. This is why, in the final scenes of the movie, Jules refuses to kill either Pumpkin or Honey Bunny. Your character's POV is important because it lays a foundation for your personality triangle. It directly impacts how they compensate and how they communicate with the world. So let's talk about character compensation and what I mean by that. Compensating is a term that I use when a character builds a mask around themselves or develops an entirely new persona to hide their wound, to mask their wound. This is similar to the psychology triangle of how a wound creates a false want. In the personality triangle, your character actually begins to compensate their behavior to make up for their wound, to hide their wound, and to mask their wound. I know I use comic book characters a lot on this channel as examples for character development or story development, but that's only because I actually think that comic book characters best encapsulate the dynamics that I'm talking about that are still relevant for filmmaking. Let's look at two legendary comic book characters and how they have compensated to hide their wounds. Batman's wound comes from watching his parents being murdered, and it creates a want for vigilantism in his life. But it's hard not to see Batman as still this sad, emotional orphan who's lost his parents, this gaping wound in his chest at a loss of his parents that he can never fill. So what does he do? He creates the persona, he compensates by creating the persona of Batman, this emotionless, cold, calculating hero that he feels he needs to be to hide the pain of his wound. In many ways, the Batman persona compensates for his emotional vulnerability. He both literally and figuratively puts on a mask to hide his wound and pain. Another great example is Spider-Man, and his wound is because he is actually responsible for the death of his Uncle Ben. That event so traumatizes him that he decides to do right and fight crime. But again, it's hard not to see the Spider-Man character without realizing that so much of it is driven by his wound of guilt, the feeling of responsibility that he has for his Uncle Ben's death. It's hard not to look at the wisecracking webhead and not see that persona as a way of compensating for the guilt that he's carrying for the death of his Uncle Ben. Now, let me give you an example from the movies. In the movie Ford vs. Ferrari, Christian Bale plays a character called Ken Miles, a washed-up race car driver who is now broke and working as a mechanic. This clearly wounds Miles. He feels that he deserves better from his life and from his sport. So he ends up compensating by belittling anyone that doesn't understand cars as well as he does. There's this amazing scene where he basically tells a client that he's not man enough to drive the car that he's fixing right now. Now, this persona is in stark contrast to how he is in his personal life, where you see him being very warm and generous with his wife and son. But if you place him in an environment where his ego is threatened, he becomes combatant and difficult. Now, this compensation is much more subtle than Batman or Spider-Man, but it's still there. It's still part of the dynamic of the character's personality. Now, not every character you write was going to need sort of an extreme compensation as part of their personality triangle, but it is absolutely something that you should keep in mind when writing your characters. It shows Hollywood readers that you take your writing seriously. It shows that you're able to address story and character development at an advanced level, and it adds a layer of richness and complexity to your characters that audience and readers will gravitate towards when they read and see your work. Now, it's time to talk about character voice. One of the most common feedback that producers give screenwriters is that their characters sound alike. What they mean by that is that each character doesn't have a distinct voice. Nailing a unique voice for your characters is critical for your success as a screenwriter. In fact, if you write great voices, you will be a very in-demand screenwriter in the industry. I like to think of character voices as the verbal cues a character gives an audience or reader in terms of how they're grappling with their POV and their compensation. So let me give you some examples of how POV and compensations impact character voices. In A Christmas Carol, Scrooge's POV is that the only thing that matters in life is the accumulation of wealth, and the only thing that makes you worthy of being a person is the accumulation of wealth. So his voice tends to be very sarcastic, very down-putting towards the poor, but also towards any endeavor that is not revolving around the accumulation of money. In Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Rick Dalton's POV is that he's a washed-up actor whose best days are behind him. He compensates by trying to seem very confident in front of other people, but in private, he tends to speak in very insecure and unsure ways about himself. In The X-Files, Mulder and Scully have competing POVs. Mulder believes in the paranormal. He believes in the limitless potential of reality. Scully, however, being a hardened scientist, tends to see things in very clinical terms, so the language she uses tends to diminish reality. When speaking, Scully often restricts the limits of reality only to what she believes science allows for. These characters are so distinct and so iconic precisely because the writers who wrote these voices understood the power of how POV, compensation, and voice connect to each other. Another really important thing about voice, it's more than just your character stating their POV. Your character's voice encompasses everything that has to do with the way they speak, how fast they speak, how loud they speak, whether they swear or not, the kinds of metaphor or similes they use, the kind of historical or pop cultural references they bring about. All of that informs your character's voice. All that adds richness and depth to your character's voice. But all those things must relate back to your character's point of view and must relate back to the way your character is compensating for their wound. So master your character's voice. Clearly define it. Your Hollywood reader and your audience will thank you for it, and they will notice it. It is one of the most critical aspects to screenwriting success. As you can see, the personality triangle that I use is a powerful and easy tool to develop compelling characters with amazing personalities. And the great thing is it is so simple to do. Just by understanding those three variables, you can develop unique, distinct characters with unique and distinct voices and personalities. The personality triangle is a shortcut that I use when I have to create compelling, rich characters in a short amount of time. Best of all, it is so simple. The two triangles method breaks down great character development in very simple and easily understood ways. It's something that you can sit down and focus on one element at a time and build your character step by step by step. I use it all the time, and I hope you will too. So that's it. That's part 2 of my 2 triangles method to character development. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, feel free to drop them in the box below. And please like and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Happy writing.